Alright folks, welcome back to the channel and the grand finale. If you're new and have no clue as to what's going on, firstly, welcome, it's nice to have you. Secondly, go check out the playlist for the previous videos, they'll catch you up nicely. As per though, a quick recap of last time. We hit 5k gear score, so that meant all the goals set forth in the first video had been met. We got the first TOC 10 heroic done and just generally had an alright week. Nexus braces were and continue to be a fable from times gone by, as they clearly don't exist, but Thresh is now at a point where he can pretty much do what he wants, and any form of progression left for this character, whilst attainable in a pug, would be better served in an organised group, or more preferably a guild, but I'll touch on that nearer the end. So, following on from the last video, not much beyond some dungeons. Tuesday, first thing I did was straight into the Nexus. No braces, damn things are just elusive, but I did run into the first person who, if I could have, I probably would have punched. The previous run-ins with arseholes I've had annoyed me, and yeah, sometimes made me want to switch the game off for a bit, but this bloke was just the epitome of a colossal knob that didn't shut up. As I said, it was a Nexus, no mention of a skip or anything. Personally, I don't like skips. I mean, missing the odd trash pack here or there is different, but when you're gutting whole sections of the raid or dungeon I should say, just for a quote-unquote speed run to get things done as efficiently as possible, it either ends up taking longer to do because you need an incredibly specific setup, as is the case with the most recent skip that's been discovered in Old Kingdom, requiring a mage and a warlock, or someone inevitably cocks it up, causing a wipe, and all the time that you spent trying to do the skip, you might as well have just spent on the bloody dungeon as intended. But, tangent aside, as soon as we enter and everyone's buffed and what have you, I start making my way down the standard route for the dungeon, only for the healer to pipe up telling me to follow him. I know what's coming, but quite frankly I was not in the mood to argue with another muppet who thinks they're being clever by cutting out the first boss of the dungeon. So yes, we end up doing just that. Again, if you put together a run where it's advertised, it's a skip, fair enough, you do you. But when people join a dungeon and try to strong-arm people into doing skips and so on, it just rubs me the wrong way. Through most of the run, he was the epitome of the go guy, if you've ever seen Crendor's old sketches. After Anomalous, though, the mage in our group did a stupid and jumped off the edge into the pit below. It is what it is, it happens, not a big deal. However, because of this he couldn't be rezzed, and the room after that boss, in my experience, if you're not all together, someone will eventually arse pull something, so I was just waiting for the mage to run back in. I said as such, and as soon as I did, the healer and the DK ran off and started pulling, so I left them to it. I wasn't going to play silly buggers. Once the mage arrived and we caught up, I jokingly said, "Are you a bit impatient, lads?" Only for the healer to respond, "You are not a lord, only a tank, chill." Apparently, I should not have had ideas above my station as a mere tank and opt to wait for a member of our party to actually run back into the dungeon and be with us before continuing. Perhaps I should have offered to shine his shoes and muck out his stables. But basically after this, any action I took or anything I said was just met with an endless tirade of sarcastic remarks. He just didn't shut up. But yeah, the only thing that happened Tuesday was that. Everything else was a bit meh. Wednesday hits and straight into VOA 25. Some Paladin gear this week, but it was wholly so sadly not for me. Then Anixia 10. Luck was with me this reset, and I got me hands on the 10-man tanking ring, beating out a DPS who also reserved it, which was pretty satisfying, I'm not going to lie. It was a very nice day outside though, so after that I went outside, enjoyed the sun, and barbecued myself for a couple of hours. Later that evening, however, I logged on and saw a TOC 10 heroic group going, and as I was now over 5k, had the achievement from last week, I thought this shouldn't be a problem. The requirements for this group were 5k minimum gear score with a guarantee 50-50. Perfect place to test things out, I thought. So I got into the group no bother, as expected, but about halfway through I very much wanted to leave the group again. To get it out of the way, no, we didn't hit 50. This group would not have done a 50-50 run if you left them on these bosses for a month. we wiped on faction champs, twins, and a noob. Now, there was a Discord, we were asked to join, and everyone did, but it mattered not. It was very clear, despite this apparently being a group for the experienced and the geared, the only thing this group had was the gear. You had people giving out very poor advice. On faction champions, for example, some clever clogs piped up and said to leave the melee till last, which, if you've ever done that fight, is fucking stupid because they hunt down your healers and eat the poor bastards. And that's what happened. Melee were ignored and everyone died a horrid death because of it. On twins, the soakers didn't know how to soak, and that just resulted in a wipe, nearly 2. But luckily, a couple of people remained alive. We managed to kill it with like 3 or 4 people left. And Anubarak. He was a bit of a kiting disaster, as generally happens, but some bad RNG did rear its head. One of the healers got targeted by a noob twice. First time he was fine, and he got bopped. Second time, we just physically couldn't do that because of the debuff, and instead of making for the nearest frost patch to save his ass, he stood still and got himself killed. After we wiped, he flamed all the paladins in Discord for not saving his ass, and despite many attempts to point out that we couldn't due to him having forbearance, he didn't really seem to accept his death was on his own head. So yeah, it was just a bunch of people shouting and flaming other people who were shouting and flaming. Overall, despite the stiffer requirements to entry, it was a far worse group and far worse experience compared to last week's 10-man. Last week, they were pretty bloody chill. The wipes were unfortunate, but it was never a big deal, and despite the door being open for me to access certain groups now, it doesn't mean it will be in green pastures, beautiful women, puppies, and sunshine on the other side. I did, however, get another trophy, though I didn't have the badges for the item I wanted, so that's something I was going to pick up later in the week. But yeah, that was really it for Wednesday. Thursday comes around, and I did a VOA 10 and Oni 25. No new items, sadly, more badges, and another Nexus. Again, no bracers, a pretty disappointing day, and due to other things I had on, didn't really get beyond that. Then we get to Friday. Nexus again, no bracers, continued sadness and heartbreak. But the main thing I was trying to do here was find a 25-man TOC with a couple of heroic kills, maybe get some decent items, another trophy, that sort of thing. However, most on-the-fly groups are normals, and the only heroic groups I was able to find were either pre-established pugs that needed very few people, the odd DPS or healer mainly, or were at times I was otherwise engaged, guild raids, IRL commitments, so on and so forth. And I just ended up putting the game on a secondary monitor, watching TV on another, whilst writing up scripts and researching for other videos and projects on my main one. So whilst I wasn't doing nothing, so to speak, as far as the game goes, I was doing shit all apart from looking through LFG and the group finder every few minutes. It was truly a dull and pointless experience. So no progress was really made Friday, as there weren't any groups that I could join. And that remained the case even into Saturday. Same thing. I just looked for that group that was killing at least 3 out of 5 heroic, because I could live with that, and it's the character's first foray into 25-man heroic. Sadly, no such luck. Again, the game ended up being on a secondary monitor whilst I did other things, which for my workflow was pretty good. I've managed to get underway on several new projects whilst trying to finish this one off, but it's not exactly an exciting experience as far as the game's concerned, and just made me yearn for a guild invite. Sunday hits and I realise I now have enough essences to purchase that shield I mentioned last week, so that was a small win. But honestly, as a whole, I was just a little dejected at this point. I've spent most of my playtime this week sat in Dalaran twiddling my thumbs, and I'll touch on this in particular a bit more when I go over my final thoughts. I don't want to go too in-depth just yet, but it was just dull. So dull, and it wasn't even a case of my being rejected from groups or anything like that. At least in that scenario, I'm actually doing something. I just couldn't find the type of group that I needed, and come mid-afternoonish, I was about to throw in the towel. I was going to be busy over the next couple of days anyway, not really going to have the time to raid Monday or Tuesday. and I would rather just take the small win of possible minor upgrades in normal than nothing at all. As I came to this decision, the skies cleared, the heavens opened, and an angel did appear in LFG. Looking for more, TOC 25, 4 out of 5 heroic, need all. I practically jumped for joy. I shot this chap a whisper. Naturally, he wanted to know my credentials. Told him this character diddly squat, but I know my shit, I'm geared, and the usual song and dance for this sort of thing. Whereas at this point, I'd normally expect to be ignored or told no. The guy went, nah, that's fine, I trust you, just let me see your gear first. And yeah, I got in, happy days. And honestly, this guy was a man after my own heart. He was very laid back, but knew his shit. He put together a group that for the most part knew its shit, and it was an alright raid. For those unaware, in TOC, the first boss, rather than being a free win, is basically the measuring stick by which you can judge a group's potential progress. It can screw over an underprepared group very, very quickly, and if you die on the Worms or Ice Howl, it's back to the start. And granted, it was a very messy kill for us, and we only beat the enraged timer by like 5 seconds, but it was kind of down to some unfortunate luck. All the healers got hit with a fire from Dreadscale, and detonated in the blink of an eye. Some battle reses went out, and we recovered enough to one-shot it, which wasn't too bad for a random pug on a Sunday afternoon. And if you down Beasts of Northrend Heroic, you shouldn't have any issues on the next 2 bosses, and yeah, we didn't. We sailed right through to the Twin Valkyr, and in all of this, sadly, the only tank loot that dropped was the heroic version of the cloak I already had. But the other tank had reserved it, so not a big deal. I was after the bracers, a trophy, and the chest piece from Beasts anyway. But then we hit the Twins and a minor snag. You see, the tactic the group leader had put out there was one that I know very well, as it's what my guild does for this fight. You hero on pull, switch colour for the Dark Shield, then switch back. It's a viable tactic, and so long as everyone's brains are switched on, it's not a problem. However, a good portion of our DPS couldn't be fucked and just weren't reading the raid chat. Oh yeah, that reminds me, all of this was done with no Discord. It was a fairly laid-back Sunday event. Now, the lack of reading of the chat was pretty obvious throughout most of the run up to this point. You see, me and the other tank would discuss in whisper who's doing what, and then we'd inform everyone else in raid chat at least 2 or 3 times before the boss was pulled. But you'd still get the same people, every boss going, who's tanking what? What's going on? I don't know. Someone help. And then trying to enforce their own tanking strats on us because they just weren't paying attention. But back to the Twins, it was clear a number of the DPS wanted to do the other, what I would call the lazy bastard tactic of saving heroism for the Dark Shield so they don't have to move or anything like that. And yes, it's viable, but it is the lazy bastard tactic, and that might be the last ability you get from that boss, so hero is essentially wasted on that fight. It also teaches you far less about the encounter than the other method. After a few wipes, the shaman in charge of hero was having none of it and kept up with the old hero at the start tactic, to the point the lazy bastards just outright conceded, did it the way they were told to do it from the start, and surprise, surprise, the fucking boss fell over. So, lessons to be learned here, folks. Don't be a lazy bastard, listen to the tactics, and the boss will generally die. We then did a Nubarak normal. No one expected a heroic kill, or any attempts to be fair, so we just went for it and the big bug died. No ifs or buts, it just face planted very, very quickly. Sadly, none of my specific reserves dropped, but there were a load of trophies and I walked out with one. I also now had enough badges to use the trophy I got on the 10-man earlier in the week, so I went and replaced my legs, which was massive. So there we are, depending on the gear I'm wearing, as I'm chopping and changing trinkets and Librams here and there, depending on the content and what have you, Thresh is either just below 5.1k or slightly over it. But that's where he is after the journey of the last 4 weeks. A pretty solid character to have in my back pocket for sure. So this leads me on nicely to my final thoughts and conclusions. So let's answer the question, is it too late to start Wrath? Not by a long shot. In fact, I would go as far to say this is probably the best phase to join in on the action because TOC is the easy catch-up raid of Wrath. Even on Heroic, it doesn't hold a candle to Ulduar hard modes, and as such, the sheer volume of groups out there mean that someone will eventually take you. And that will only become easier as the weeks go on, as your knowledge increases, as you get the gear, the achievements, so on and so forth. And paired with the Titan Room beta system currently in effect, gearing is far from a slog. You should very quickly find yourself progressing and improving your equipment day on day, week on week. At the very least, you can go to the 4.5 mark just by doing the dungeons and not even setting foot in a raid at all. And with the amount of simple to acquire and use currencies, with the badges and the essences, for the most part, there will be a backup option for those slots that just don't want to drop. So there will always be something for a fresh character to work towards. Hell, even alts on established accounts benefit from these systems quite nicely. So, the avenues for gearing are plentiful, and you can very quickly get up to speed. Of course, it depends on the time and effort you put in. If you play for an hour a week, don't expect to be able to partake in the same content and be as geared as someone who puts in 8 hours a day. Now, having said that, time investment is not a guarantee of reward, and if those 8 hours are spent dancing on mailboxes or death rolling in Ironforge, then yes, you won't get as far as someone who only has 4 hours a day to play, but those 4 hours that are then spent in dungeons, raid, PvP, etc. And it can definitely skew a little again if you're in a guild or a regular pug that is a guild in all but name, because those people don't need to spend potentially hours just looking for a group. They've got one. They just show up at the appointed time, kill the shit, get their loot, and go about their day. And on that, find a guild. Please, just do it. Regular group content like this is leagues better in a guild. There are the age-old excuses of tyrannical raid leaders and loot-whoring officers. Yeah, alright, in the odd case those people exist, but please be real. If every guild was like that, group content would have crumbled 20 years ago. If you end up in a guild like that, just find a new one. I promise they are not all hellscapes run by egotistical nutbags. A decent guild is a good community, and in that community you can get so much more out of the game that you otherwise wouldn't. You make friends, you might do achievement runs, farm more raids for shits and giggles. Just generally the game is more enjoyable in a good guild, and if progression raiding is a goal for you moving forward, be that ICC, Cataclysm, or if Blizzard are feeling particularly creative that week, Classic Plus, do it in a guild. A decent guild will learn from their mistakes in a raid, a wipe is information that can be properly filtered. You might have 10 wipes on any given boss of any given raid before you kill it, but the next week you might only have 3 or 4, the week after it's a one-shot, and from there, when everyone is comfortable and knows what's going on, the experience is far more enjoyable because you've learned the encounter with your fellow guildies, and for the most part, everyone should be on the same page with what to do. And yeah, just using this project as a brief example, I have spent an ungodly amount of time just sat in Dalaran group hunting. It's dull, it's inefficient, and group quality is so inconsistent. I could and should be doing something else with my time. If Thresh was in my current guild, there would be a smattering of runs I could attend for both 10 and 25 man. I wouldn't have to interview every time I wanted to do a bit of content, and the chances of the kills actually happening are immeasurably higher, and I know for the most part the skill and ability of my fellow guildies and regular pug attendees. And the time I spent running around Dalaran like a complete pillock trying to get into a group, I could be on an ult, leveling professions, farming mounts, doing PvP. All sorts of content that is available but is essentially lost because I'm just staring at LFG and Group Finder because I need to be ready to jump into that group as soon as possible with as few obstacles as possible in case that spot goes to someone else. Also, I want to expand on something I briefly mentioned in part 3. Knowledge. As I've said many times throughout this and will continue to until I'm blue in the face, everyone was a noob at some point, and not knowing isn't inherently a bad thing. You need to learn at some point. But I very rarely came across another tank who knew the basics of how the bosses worked to a passable degree. I had to coach so many of them in normal that I thought I was being trolled by some great cosmic being. This was less of an issue in heroic though. But yeah, this is the age of information. I don't understand why you wouldn't just look up a quick 5-minute guide on YouTube. They do exist. You don't need a list of notes to plan out your every bloody move, but some numpty on YouTube has put the effort in to show you that fire bad, stay away from fire, and those basics will, funnily enough, get you very, very far. And even if, for some reason, you don't want to do that, why not say before the raid starts you don't know what you're doing so someone can explain it to you? Most pugs I've been in since the beginning of time, someone pipes up and says, let us know if you don't know what's going on so we can tell you and avoid a wipe. Most people are reasonable. Most people will give you the benefit of the doubt. It's when you say nothing and cause wipes that people start to become less reasonable and less willing to help you because you don't appear to want to help yourself. When people, past and present, have pointed this out, the most common response is, oh, I've said that and I was kicked, or I don't want to be kicked, so I say nothing and stand at the back. Right, okay. If you join, for example, a 25-man heroic pug 2 to 3 months into the patch and you have never done the raid before on any difficulty, done no research, don't know what targets to prioritize, when to use your cooldowns, what abilities to avoid, so on and so forth, and the group decides to replace you, I'm sorry, but I can't really blame them. No one wants to be wiping in heroic pug repeatedly because a handful of people couldn't take 5 to 10 minutes to research the damn raid before entering. At that point, you're not going to be an active participant, you are just dead weight. In a normal run, if someone boots you, alright, they're probably a bit of a knob. Normal is a piece of piss, and you will need to learn the basics somehow, and normal is good for that. Again, most people are reasonable. If you say you're new and unsure, they will give you the pointers you need and set you on the right path. Even if you were around 15 years ago, just watch a quick guide. Speaking from personal experience, I did Ulduar and TOC back then, but I still needed to go and refresh a few things. I remembered a fair bit, but not everything. And this does kind of look back to why I said get a guild. Lack of knowledge is far less punishing in a guild. That is an environment where you should be able to make mistakes and learn from them. Now, if your aim is for those server first guilds and you fuck up spectacularly each and every raid, then that's probably not for you. But if you find a guild that suits you, is at your level and all of that noise, learning that fire bad the hard way, it's just so much more acceptable in a guild. So, to finish then, no, it's not too late to start Wrath. There will never be a better time to get back into Classic than right now, and just get a character up to snuff. Now, I can't speak for the next round of Titan Room Beta Dungeons, or Titan Room Charlie, or whatever they're called, and I can't see how they're going to play out. Alpha was a bit of a dead duck, but Beta has been pretty decent, and it's a really great place to get an ult geared up. And the current raid is a pretty decent catch-up raid, and as ICC is around the corner, if you want to get your chance to punch Arthas in the throat, hop to it. Time's running out. And overall, this has been a fairly positive experience. The lack of achievements or anything like that on this character have only ever proven to be the most minor of obstacles. And as I suspected from the very beginning, once you hit that 5k marker, it's only the really high-end, guarantee to clear everything, one-shot groups that will be beyond you. But that's to be expected, and you kind of shouldn't hope to get into those runs until you've got a bit of gear and a bit of experience under your belt. Anyway, this has gone on long enough. I hope you've enjoyed things up to now, and that some of you get some use out of this. If you'd be so kind as to like, sub, share with your pals, and so on, that'd be grand. Have a good one, folks. Bye for now.